Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Wednesday, June 25th, 2025 Policy Committee meeting. I'm going to start with 1.02, approval of the May 21st Policy Committee draft meeting minutes.
I will move the minutes.
Second.
All those in favor? And that is unanimous. We'll now move on to 1.03, public comment. Looks like we have 9 people signed up, and if you would, when I call your name, if you would you repeat your name as you start your comments, please? So our first speaker is Chloe Celeste. Got all excited there. The board and this committee views public comment as an opportunity to hear concerns of the public. Public comment will be received by this committee on issues relating to policies currently being reviewed with the understanding and expectation that it is not considered a question and answer platform with committee members. Consequently, the committee will not provide a response to public comments presented in its meeting or submitted in writing. The committee will provide a maximum of 40 minutes, and all speakers will be limited to 2 minutes for their public comment. All right, now, Chloe, if you'd repeat your name for me.
Hi everyone, my name is Chloe Celeste. I am 16 years old, and I'm a recent former student of FCPS, and I'm still quite close with friends, including trans friends in FCPS. I chose to take the time to come out here today to show my support for Policy 443. As an openly transgender girl myself, this policy was crucial to my mental health during my time spent in school. I was simply allowed to be who I am, and the support I felt from staff was exactly what I needed to thrive. It's hard going against the grain in this world. However, queer people like myself do not fold. We are unapologetically us, and we will be here forever despite attempts to silence us. We refuse to live by someone else's standards. We refuse to sit down and know our role. We refuse to fall in line. Trans people exist, have always existed, and will always exist. That's just a fact of life. Civil rights are not a zero-sum game. Equality hurts no one, and there are, statistically speaking, hundreds of trans and non-binary students in FCPS. I happen to personally know many of them, and I've heard from everyone I've talked to that this policy is integral in making sure queer students are respected and safe. If this board cares about the well-being of said students, they will move to keep Policy 443 in place with its original language. Dissenters will find themselves neatly located on the wrong side of history.
Thank you. Next we have Glory Casuto.
Greetings. Hi, my name is Glory Casuto. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the program director at the Frederick Center, Frederick's LGBTQ Community Center. I was also a student at Brunswick from K through 12. Today, I'd like to express my urgent support for including gender expression and identity in FCPS policies 443 and 444 to bolster these policies. Each week, I work with over 50 LGBTQ+ identifying youth ages 9 to 18 at our support groups at the Frederick Center. Board Member Allen, in 2023, you visited with our youth groups and sat in our community center with our students. You saw firsthand the fear and anxiety that lives within these students when discussing that Policy 443 may be eliminated or pared down, which is exactly what you are now proposing. They shared their concerns about lack of affirmation in their schools and their mental health struggles and suicidality as a direct result of lack of affirmation of their gender identities. When you met our students, you stated that you were stunned at the horrific experiences that they have lived through in our schools. Policies 443 and 444 must protect those students that you met. They are not a hypothetical discussion amongst opposing political sides. They are real children that trusted you with their hardships and personal stories of experiences in Frederick County schools. These proposed changes will negatively impact every single child that you met in 2023 and every youth that I work with. For LGBTQ students, this policy is not about bathroom or sports. It is about dignity as human beings and being treated as though they matter. We hear so much misguided, misinformed, and hateful rhetoric about our community in these policy meetings, and we are neglecting the very people you vowed to protect to serve during your terms. I am here to speak for the queer students that I work with every day who deserve to be affirmed in their schools. They deserve to have explicit protections in place, and they deserve to have their elected officials vote to enshrine those protections for generations to come. Please bolster these policies because queer children in FCPS should be able to continue to trust their identities, and therefore well-being in our schools are protected by you. Thank you, and happy Pride.
Thank you. Next, we have Casey Day.
Good morning, I'm Casey Day. I am here, I sent you a detailed letter with some of my feedback on the posted proposals that were there for, that were submitted by you in previous meetings, but I had a few that I wanted to talk about today. The first was in section 443.7 on athletics. Ms. Allen's revision here is antithetical to the purpose of the policy and shouldn't even be considered. Mr. Rose's proposal creates an unnecessary appeals process that only applies to transgender students, not their cisgender peers. We don't ask a 6'4" middle school basketball player or a 350-pound middle school football player to go through an appeals process for competitive advantage or safety concerns. This unequal treatment sends a harmful message and creates a barrier that shouldn't exist. The appeals process seems like an attempt to quiet some resistance by creating unnecessary bureaucracy. FCPS should follow the MPSSAA guidelines already in place for athletic participation. On the idea of training, one of the suggestions was to make that training optional. We require staff training on racism, special education, sexual harassment, and a host of other things. Inclusion for transgender and gender nonconforming students is just as essential and should always be required. Furthermore, the training should be expanded to include specifics related to intersex students and allyship strategies for staff. And finally, there needs to be in the policy a protection for staff allyship. The ability for staff to display safe space signs, pride flags, or include pronouns in their email signatures may seem small, but it can have a profound impact. According to the Trevor Project, having just one trusted adult or a visibly safe space in a school setting can reduce the risk of suicide for LGBTQ+ youth by over 40%. Staff in your schools have received differing messages about whether or not these symbols and simple acts are allowable. FCPS makes it clear that this kind of support is not only allowed, but it is protected for their staff. So I urge you to take a few moments to look back at the other detailed feedback that I've provided, and I appreciate the opportunity to provide my thoughts here. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Josh Kramer.
Hey, good morning. Josh Kramer, here to note my support for keeping the mandatory training that staff receives on Policy 443. So as a teacher myself, and as many of my colleagues do, I tend to sigh and do a kind of ugh whenever I hear I have to go to yet another training session. We do a lot of training, but teachers appreciate when training is meaningful and useful. Annual training on student legal rights regarding disclosing their gender identity, developmental understandings, concepts and terms of gender identity, strategies on communicating with families about gender identity and expression, and classroom management techniques to prevent and intervene in bullying are what myself and most of my colleagues would agree is useful training. Board member Nancy Allen has proposed making this training optional. Currently, these trainings are conducted during already scheduled after-school staff meetings, a time that teachers and the board have agreed to in negotiated agreements. They typically take 15 to 20 minutes out of one such monthly meeting. This is not an onerous training, and it is meaningful and a good use of our time. Trans and gender nonconforming students have rights to self-expression, and as educators, it is our responsibility to ensure student rights are protected. There are students, I've taught several of them, who are out at school but not at home. For some of those students, their classmates only know them by their self-identified name and gender. By making this training optional, teachers may miss out on vital information about a student's legal rights, putting themselves, the school system, and students at risk. The teacher and the school system at risk of lawsuits, and the student at risk of potential abuse or rejection at home or at school. One goal for us teachers, and we do this with the support of the board and FCPS staff, is to make our learning environment feel safe, inviting, and comfortable so that students increase their chances for success. I am more than willing to participate in a brief training each year that helps me do that for some of my most vulnerable students. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, we have Jess Douglas.
Good morning, Jess Douglas. I would like to address the proposed language for policy 443.6. This states in part that all students must have access to facilities, including restrooms, locker rooms, or changing facilities that correspond to their gender identity. Access is provided without any additional complicating procedure. Nancy Allen's proposal cuts out most of that language and proposes that students be provided with safe alternatives upon request. I find her revisions unnecessary and cruel, ignoring students' determination to decide which facilities are consistent with their gender and requiring them to make a special request for their basic needs. Since the language for this policy is under review, I think it is important to consider the need for a non-stigmatizing, gender-neutral restroom on each floor of our public schools. PFLAG recommends that schools designate any existing facility that is designed to be used by only one person at a time as gender neutral or all gender. School districts should proactively review policies and consider revisions that protect LGBTQIA+ students from harassment or discrimination to ensure compliance with Title IX. PFLAG has recommended that the district consider providing such restrooms when planning for new school construction, but I would argue, as someone who has been paying particular attention to school safety for the last 7 years, that if we can retrofit every FCPS school entrance to provide for an extra set of doors between the entrance and the main office and hallways for the safety of our students, even considering all of our budget constraints, we can certainly find a way to include a non-stigmatizing, gender-neutral restroom on every floor, or even our existing FCPS schools. We can retrofit a bathroom or set of gender-segregated bathrooms in each school so that every floor of a school has a non-stigmatizing, gender-neutral restroom. Both measures are for the protection of our students, and if we can do one, we can do the other.
Thank you. Next, we have Dana Mooney.
Hello, I'm Dana Mooney, and the words we use matter. When people use terms such as gender dysphoria, gender questioning, gender distress, gender issues, and gender-related concerns in place of transgender, it implies that being transgender is a mental disorder. When it is said that trans people identify as their gender, that implies that gender identity is a choice. Terms such as transgenderism and gender ideology, which have been used during public comments in this room, are not terms used by transgender people. These terms are used by anti-transgender activists to dehumanize transgender people and reduce who they are to a condition or a dangerous ideology that threatens free speech. It is an attempt to invalidate and erase transgender people from our community. And let's be clear here. There is no debate or compromise on this. Erasing a group of people is wrong. Using outdated, harmful terminology is wrong. It is important to remember that while being transgender is not an illness, many transgender people need to deal with physical and mental health problems because of this widespread discrimination. Fewer than 1 in 3 transgender and non-binary youth found their home to be gender affirming. 13% of LGBTQ+ young people reported being threatened with or subjected to conversion therapy. LGBTQ+ youth have 120% higher risk of experiencing some form of homelessness. Therefore, it is essential that we protect student privacy, which, while following Regulation 436, which goes with Policy 443, and clearly states that every effort shall be made to encourage and support communication between transgender and gender nonconforming students and the student's parent guardian. Parent guardians will be contacted anytime there is a health or safety concern regarding the student. If FCPS is serious about its commitment to provide exceptional education and equity for every child every day, then we need to ensure that all students are respected and celebrated for who they are.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Jennifer Williams.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Williams. Like most of us, I was pretty uneducated about what it means to be trans. So there are many resources available in our public libraries, and I've been studying, and I would recommend that all of you on our board do the same. I'm going to address one issue, bathroom use, today. A 2019 Harvard School study of 4,000 transgender students found that policies forcing them to use bathrooms of their sex assigned at birth resulted in a huge increase in rates of sexual assault on the transgender kids. Forcing these kids to use bathrooms that don't align with their gender identity leads to sexual assault against the transgender children. Repeated studies have found that these trans-inclusive bathroom policies, trans-inclusive, were not associated with any increased risk of sexual assault against the general population or cisgender children. The reality is that trans-inclusive restroom policies pose no risk and actually lowers the rates of assault against trans children. Trans students are in danger when forced to use bathrooms that are not consistent with their gender identity. These kids have trouble enough getting through their day, thanks to the bias against them in their everyday lives. Our schools should be a safe haven for them, where they are free to be themselves. They are our children too. Let's give them the love, support, and the dignity that they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Peter Brim.
My name is Peter Brem. My pronouns are he, him. I recommend, I'm speaking on 443.5, use of preferred name and official records. I recommend replacing the terms, quote, preferred name and pronoun, quote, with either identified or affirmed and updated name and pronouns. Even if a student has not legally changed their name, the name they go by is their name and must be affirmed as such. For further clarity, I also recommend including the phrase, a student is not required to change their official records or obtain a court-ordered name and/or gender change as a prerequisite to being addressed by the name and pronoun that corresponds with their gender identity. Parents, guardians, consent, and/or knowledge should not be required to address a student by their affirmed name and pronouns. This change will ensure that all students are respected and supported regardless of their legal or familial circumstances. Next, the policy should document that middle school and high school teachers should ask students for their identified and affirmed name and identified and affirmed pronouns using an in-class document such as a get-to-know-you or similar type of worksheet, or handle this verbally on an individual basis. These affirmed and identified and updated names and pronouns should be marked on attendance sheets and seating charts for co-teachers, paraprofessionals, and substitute teachers to use unless asked not to by the student. Affirmed and identified names and pronouns for all students should be used for them in every interaction unless the interaction could compromise the student's privacy. This is important because teachers have been told in FCPS to not ask for this information, and so it needs to be documented in the policy. Second, we recognize the policy committee has mentioned concern over compelled speech, and we still, because of Maryland MCPS guidance, feel that the word should instead of will can be used. Finally, I'll close there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our last speaker is the Reverend Dr. Rebecca Schillenberg.
Hello, I'm Reverend Dr. Rebecca Schillingberg, and I'm concerned about some proposed language for Policy 443, the Educational Equity and Excellence, Section C2, which currently reads, to meet the commitment set forth in Section C1, it is the board's expectation that FCPS establish and promote a culture of valuing the unique characteristics and identifiers of every student, including ability, and it lists some categories, age, ethnicity, family structure, gender expression, gender identity, language, nationality, and it goes on with some more characteristics. In the FCPS committee draft of Policy 444, Ms. Allen's proposed language deletes gender expression, and gender identity from the list of valued characteristics that identifies students. Mr. Rose's proposed language includes these. Excluding these students from Policy 444 444 does nothing to better the educational experience of any student. Rather than helping anyone, the targeted removal of gender expression, and gender identity from policy 444 to me represents a clear attack on the inclusion and well-being and safety of transgender, and gender nonconforming students that will further open the door to erosion of the protections of these students. Please keep these students listed explicitly in policy 444. They are a valuable part of our community. Having them included makes the difference to all students and parents. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our public comment for today. Before we get started on the next part of our meeting, I'm going to ask Mr. Blevis. He's got some explanation on the documents that are included on our board docs.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Rose. Typically, when staff presents a policy, we put the existing version of the policy and then a draft of a new policy that is aligned with the new format. We didn't do that for 443 and 444 because staff is not presenting its own proposed language. We're taking the language that the board members, the panel members, have shared with us. So we took a little bit of a different approach, and for those of you who are going to watch this back or looking at the documents online, I just want to orient you to what you're looking at. We created a single document that incorporates the existing policy language and the language that Ms. Allen and Mr. Rose shared with my office in advance. They did not share these with the red line, the strike through, and the underline. My staff compared what they shared to the existing language so you could see how the change presents, not so you see directly just what they show. This way you can kind of see what's going to be different if you adopt one version or another version. And then, of course, we can wordsmith and come up with a combined version that incorporates the comments. For 444, because this is the first time it's being presented, there are no staff suggested language. In 443, we tried to harmonize some of the work that we did during the last policy meeting, and you'll see that in the staff suggested, staff proposed language section. So hopefully that just helps orient. In the future, if we have policies where the board members provide us with language in advance, we may continue to use this format because I actually do think it's helpful to have everything in one place like this.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, so now we'll move on to 1.04, and that's our discussion on policy 444, educational equity and excellence.
It's your policy.
All right, would either one of you like to kick it off with a input, statement, anything you'd like to share first to get us going?
I don't have a major statement on this, but I was so prepared. I planned to come with something today because Mr. Rose and Miss Allen were so prepared with written things, and I looked at it and I'm like, I don't really see anything that needs to be changed particularly. And so I wasn't going to do a lot of wordsmithing till we all got together. I could have run it through AI. I thought about that later just to say, hey, in these parameters, but so, I really, the one thing I would say with Miss Allen's comments, I did find a little odd the one paragraph where it was Mabe's equity questions. I don't think you can just change Mabe's equity questions where Mr. Rose took it out of a Mabe reference. So that's the difference I saw there. If we're going to reference Mabe equity work, I think we have to keep to their work. If we go away from that, then we don't have to stick strictly to theirs. So that's really is my only thought on that.
I'll just maybe address that part of it. That's kind of the reason why I removed it, is that I just didn't love how that was set with the questions. I kind of prefer action. So that's why I incorporated action statements in that part of it. So I just for me personally, I didn't care for that section. So.
If I can just say, Mabe worked on this. This was really the first work done in Maryland on an actual equity statement. And so really, I think MSDE is kind of then, it's kind of expanded from there to the whole state. And so, when you have a first crack at something, people are going to improve it. So I don't have a problem with the fact that you changed it and your rationale. It's just we either reference Mabe or we don't. But if we do, we stick to the wording. So that was my point.
Yep. Ms. Allen?
Yeah, I had some comments just to start us off with, and it's just a preface for, my position. And though I'll find that most of the people in the audience today, and maybe even watching and viewing this, will probably not be in agreement based on the comments already received. But, I want to make sure that, our intent for this policy is one that actually can be measured. So if we are going to create policies, I want to truly understand if there are measurements in place where we can find out whether or not the goals that we set and the policy statements that we create are achieved, okay? So through the school system. And I think that that's really important, because how are we going to know that we've reached that or we've gotten there if we don't create measures that produce outcomes, that give us the data and the information that we need to make further revisions when this policy comes back. But I also, the term equity is used to instill the belief that a system or practice can be created to equal the playing field for all, with the system and people performing without bias and favoritism. I think that sounds good, but I think the reality is that you cannot create equity in a system that requires discipline and structure. An application of judgment has to exist to determine right from wrong, good from bad, and to be able to evaluate students' and instructors' competencies. Equity doesn't want you to look at competencies, it wants you to focus on feelings and outside identifiers. It is providing accommodation when the instructor should be demanding discipline in an area of meeting the expectations and delivering on expectations, all of what we must do in the world of work. So there's just my introduction there, and then most of my revisions are based on that view.
So sometimes I'm a minimalist, and I think we should just have a basic statement that we support all students, and that should be enough, because it's public school, and that should be enough. But then I realize it's definitely not enough, because sometimes if you don't list one particular group, then people notice that that group is not there, right? And it doesn't really matter how big a group of people is or how small the group of people is. We're a school system of 48,000 students, so all 48,000 students need to be feeling welcome and feeling like this is my place to come and learn, and I'm safe here, and I'm treated like a human being. So I have a hard time thinking about this sometimes, because I feel like, why are we talking? Like, we're spending a lot of time talking about this, right? It's super important. It is super important. But I think we have to be specific when we list the students that we are supporting, because we need to make sure that they're all included. And so that's kind of where I go with that. I'm like, well, we can't just say, we're providing equal access to all students for education, because we have to be specific about what we're saying. So all of our students are important, but we have to make sure that that is written in our policy too, that we... Still getting used to this, sorry. I think we have to make sure that they're all included, and every single person, every possibility, I guess, is listed, but sometimes we get lost in the weeds at that point, because, I went down the rabbit hole of looking at other LEAs and what they have listed, and I feel like the counties that are comparable to us have a basic framework that seems similar to ours. I just think about, like, my grandmother would have been 120 this month, right? And I remember her telling me about being able to vote, right? Because that was a big deal for her. And as a white female, I haven't experienced a lot of the discrimination that other people have. And I know that. And I know that I don't understand what it was like to not be able to vote, or what it was like to not be able to go to school with other kids my age. I don't understand that because I did not have that experience. But I also know that we cannot allow our students to have those experiences too. Like, we are a public school system, and it is important that all of our students and all of our staff are supported and welcome in our community. So I think that this policy, we do need to list our populations and our groups that need to be supported.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Just kind of to, I guess, support what I've shared, and but also understanding Ms. Yoho's comments about, I didn't necessarily see things in Policy 444 that I was like, oh, wow, that needs to be changed. Or it was just the structure of it. I think you can see by my suggestions is I just went along with my thoughts about a vision statement and a mission statement when I kind of rewrote the policy purpose and the policy statement. I just wasn't and again, personal preference, I'm just not a fan of the 1, 2, 3, 4. It reads like a proclamation versus a policy. That's just a personal preference of mine. If the determination of this committee to come up with an initial, policy revision to move forward to the board said, let's stay with the same structure as it is, I wouldn't be totally against it. I'd like us to consider how we present our vision and mission behind our policies, but I wouldn't be 100% against it maintaining, because I just don't see, until we got to the implementation portion of the policy, D, that's again where I wasn't comfortable with the questions, and that's why I removed them and incorporated action statements in that regard. So in the early parts of the policy, I would not be adverse or against maintaining that structure, maybe with a few tweaks here and there, but I would like consideration of how we structure the presentation of our policies to the public. Because we talk about a lot, the whole purpose is policies are the what, and the regulation is the how. So I worry too, sometimes we in policy get too specific. We should just say, here's our what, here's what we believe, here's our mission and our vision, and then in regulation, that's the responsibility of our staff to take our mission and our vision and apply it specifically to what occurs within our schools. I look to them as the experts of how they apply our what we wish for our system. So I rely on them. In regards to equity, I think equity is the recognition of outside factors that we all have. I don't think equity ever diminishes structure and discipline. We all require it. As a coach, I always said my kids needed 3 things, and they needed love, discipline, and structure. And if you give them that, I feel like you're off to a great start. But the difference is you have to recognize where each individual comes from. And I think we've gotten too focused on some of the things that are easily seen among us all. I'm bald. They're women. I'm also old and white. But we forget about the other factors that are involved instead of the obvious. I think coming from one of the poorest states in the nation, I often think of the socioeconomic factors that are involved without having a parent in your home. I think it's important through equity that we recognize what each of our children are bringing to school, and then recognize that. And yes, sometimes we need to modify our discipline around how are we going to best affect the behaviors of that student. You know, if we just said, okay, we're going to just suspend everybody for their behavior without ever recognizing where they're coming from, that I can promise you that would not work. And frankly, we tried that. We just suspended everyone. And that doesn't work. Now, it might work while they're with us. It might get them out of our schools, but that's not our job. Our job, career and college ready, life ready. And if we just do that, I don't think we're making kids life ready. So I'm a big believer in diversity, equity, and inclusion. I regret that it's become some sort of national boogeyman. I don't even understand it, why that is. One of the most diverse countries on the planet. I think we should all recognize our diversity, our equity, and our inclusion. I just don't think that's that hard. It even infers that we're not as great as we are, despite all our flaws. Greatest country in the world, nowhere else you or I would rather be. So I think it's made us who we are. A stronger company, a stronger country, a stronger system. And so it's important for us to continue to recognize those issues and address them in policy, address them in regulation. So, long story short, I would be okay with whatever this body decides on the existing portions of the policy in A and I believe C. But I would like to see some tweaks in particular in D. I just feel like if we're going to do the what, here's what, not a bunch of questions. Here's what, and then go from there. So thank you all.
Yeah, I think that's makes a lot of sense to me as well. And you know, coming from education as a teacher for 25 years, a substitute for 12 years before that, equity is what we try to do. That's why I makes my head explode a little bit when people get upset about equity. They think equality is fair, and it is not at all. Often it can be the most unfair thing. Not every student needs the same thing. Not every school needs the same thing. And Joy Schaefer that used to sit here, she said her example, because it's easy for people to see and visualize, is that you don't buy the same size and kind of shoe for your entire family. That would be silly. Wouldn't fit them, wouldn't fit the occasion. That's all equity is, giving people what they need, and our students, especially in this case of schools. And when I would talk to people about this, you know, not to bring in politics, but on the campaign trail, and they'd say, well, that equity thing. And you'd find out what they thought is we were trying to give kids a leg up. We were trying to assure outcomes. And unfortunately, after trying for lots of years, you cannot assure outcomes. All you can do is give everybody the best footing they can to then make the most growth they can. And we do this. And if you look at our ESSA data, the Every Student Succeeds Act, the federal law, they started making us break down expenditures by school. And this is where you can really see it. So right now, I think it changes, but I think we're at about 18,000 average. And this, of course, is sometimes seems antiquated per pupil expenditure because it all gets shuffled around, but according to ESSA. And so then you'll look at some schools, let's take a school that might not have as much diversity or specialized programs. Maybe they're running at 14 to 16,000, a little bit lower than the average. You get some of the small schools, they're a little above, maybe 20, 22, because it's more expensive to run a small school. Then you get to our specialized school, Rock Creek. And it was previously running at about, in the 70s or 80s per student, 1,000, I'm sorry. It's now over, last I looked at it, was about 109,000 per student. And so to say equality, we're going to take that 18,000 and that is all we're spending on each and every student, that's not going to be fair. That's not going to give them what they need. We're not going to have good outcomes, even ones we know we can't assure. And so we take and we try to live equity. And this is why the MABE came up with that lens. They had them asking questions. I'm fine with statements and actions. And I totally agree. You know, I had just a minor epiphany, Mr. Rose, when you were speaking, is that I think the message we need to get to the public is, and especially with the way the system is now redoing regulations so that the numbers match and that they're more easily paired up, is don't just look at one. Look at our policy, but then look at the regulation. And then you'll understand the whole picture. And I think if we start really getting that message out there, maybe we don't have to reference quite so much in our policies because the regulation can do its own job.
Mr. Rose, I suggest that we move into the meat of the policies because we are down to an hour and 20 minutes and we have a great deal of work to accomplish.
Well, what the next question I was going to ask was, is there consensus to maintain the current structure of the policy, or do you want, I mean, I guess I'm asking, is there any consensus to consider what I wrote, or do we just want to stick with the, because my thoughts here is I would challenge Mr. Blevis and his team at the next meeting to come back to us with the new redlined version with our input, but we have to give him guidance on how's that going to be structured.
I'm going to say that one section that you referenced, which was D, correct?
Correct.
Yes, I would be aligned with probably removing the questions there. I did do some edits to that because I felt that it was odd and awkward, but I didn't take anything from the MABE. You know what I'm saying? I didn't revise that language, so that was on me. But yeah, I found that awkward. So I was trying to make it our own, is what I was trying to do.
Yeah.
So instead of it being a reflection of MABE. So we would, basically what you're saying is we're going to use the new template in order to create this policy, correct? Yeah.
Because that's kind of what what Mr. Blevis has done here is given us kind of a wide berth here to make these changes before placing it into the new template.
444 is already in the new template because this was revised in 2024. So it's already in the new template format.
So I guess the question is, is there any consensus to update how it is in the body of each, like policy purpose, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Do we want to stick with that? The edits are, I think, minor from my perspective, or do we want to go down another path?
I would propose that we keep it the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, using the numbers for the next draft that comes through. I think that it's an easy way for your staff to be able to make those edits and create a new template with the red line.
It helps staff to be able to say, go to A2 and make this revision, as opposed to the second paragraph in A, which doesn't sound like there's much of a difference, but when you have a long section with multiple paragraphs, it's why I take all the bullets out and replace them with letters or numbers, because to say, go to the 17th bullet, well, then you got to sit there and count 17 bullets. And I will say, I've said it before, I will say it again, bullets do not belong in schools. So we'll continue to use the numbers,
Okay.
but down the road, if you want that changed, we can change it. Just keep in mind, we have updated 38 or 39 policies using this structure, and
this is kind of our template, so.
Right.
Okay. I'm good with that. So recognizing that, is there specific changes that we'd like to discuss going down, let's say, policy purpose, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5?
I do have some language. You know, for educational equity and excellence, and again, I've already expressed my concern about the term equity. And I understand your perspective and your definition of the difference between equality and equity. But all along, probably before equity was ever used or introduced into the school system, you know, in the reference that you gave, we still provided resources to schools that needed it. So if a school showed that it needed more resources, then those resources were provided, correct? So there was really a distribution of resources that accommodated the school based on need.
I would disagree with that. We're looking at the 50th year of IDEA, and until that time, in 1975, well, it's kind of 72 with PL 194, 142, but no, they really didn't. You warehoused kids. It's one of the reasons our special education costs are getting so high is because these kids would not have been in regular schools or specialized programs. They would have been warehoused. And so, no, I would disagree with that.
Okay, well, that's a good point. Thank you. I appreciate that perspective. But I do think that now we are looking at, when we look across the system, we look at a distribution that is based on need, correct? For resources?
I would posit that that's because of equity.
I was just looking to simplify and say educational excellence. That would be the name of or the title of this policy, and that the continued reference to equity, again, is subjective and not objective. And if we're looking at the what, we have to have measurements in place to determine whether or not what we're stating here can be accomplished.
I'll only say that to try and pick and choose where we're going to remove the word, because I mean, even in your updates, equitable and equity is used throughout. So I think it's disingenuous just to ultimately remove equity from the title because it's throughout the policy. And frankly, I look at it as the point of the policy is that both, I like the title, equity and excellence. I think it makes sense to me. So I would leave that alone. Support some of the language tweaks in there, but as long as we're still recognizing that there are diverse groups in which we have to address, and that's our challenge. That's the what. So I feel comfortable more or less as is, and then moving from there.
So if I may help focus the conversation just a little bit, looking at Section A, Ms. Allen's edits really are not necessarily substantive. They're more wordsmithing, taking the same concepts, perhaps tightening the language a little bit. Mr. Rose's recommended proposed language is a more substantive change. It is a very different look at what the policy purpose would state. So if maybe the panel could kind of focus the conversation about, do you want just the wordsmithing approach that Ms. Allen has presented, or the more structural overhaul that Mr. Rose has presented?
I think that's what we came up with, though, is that we're looking at maintaining the existing structure, and despite my personal feelings, that we're not going to do a full overhaul. And we're going to remain matched with what we've done in other policies. So I think that was the consensus, wasn't it? We're going to remain with the structure.
But in terms of the content of what you've proposed, we can keep it in the structure with the A1-2, but the content is very different than the content that Ms. Allen wordsmithed.
I disagree somewhat. I think that my content, I kind of moved things from policy statement into policy purpose, and policy purpose into policy statement, I guess, is what I'm really getting at, is that I would be happy if some of the language that I incorporated in my quote-unquote vision statement was incorporated in a number statement that, you know, I don't really, to ensure that every relevant Board of Education policy, procedure, and practice provides educational equity. I'm okay with, I get it. But we're talking about this specific policy. So that's why in my first paragraph of my policy purpose, I said, the board is committed to success and achievement of each and every student, which means providing students with the equitable access to high-quality, cultural relevant instruction curriculum. I would almost like that to be a numbered statement.
So that's actually a policy statement, not a purpose for this policy. So I would my recommendation to you is if the panel likes that language, that could be incorporated into section C, which is where the policy statement would live.
Which statement was that again, Mr. Rose, that you were?
That was my proposed policy purpose statement.
Paragraph 1 under the...
Paragraph 1 on my proposed changes.
Just making sure.
So move that one down into,
Back to C where it
yep,
already is.
back to
I
policy,
mean,
a policy statement.
yes.
Then I feel like, I guess my second one, which states, the purpose of this policy is to ensure that all FC, and it lists. So
then the question for the panel is, do you prefer Mr. Rose's more concise single paragraph as to the purpose, or the existing 5 statements that Ms. Allen has edited and tightened?
So I did make a note to myself when I reviewed this again, and I said, why are we saying the same thing in different word sequence in all 3? So we should combine it. So yes, I would be aligned with combining or having one single statement there.
because an example being that in policy purpose 5, I moved that to C, because I think that's a policy statement. So I would support that.
I agree. I felt like it was a lot of things that didn't belong really in the purpose itself. And that's what I meant by getting lost in the weeds. I felt like it was a lot up front. I think, Dean, your proposed language, which is now number 2, to move that up to the purpose statement, I think that covers everything. And I think there's room in the later part of the document to cover some of the other things.
I think a lot of that gets covered in implementation.
Yeah, and that's all this is where it was blowing my mind a little bit. It's like, okay, I almost needed a checklist. Like, is this still there? Is this still, just to make sure everything's covered. I don't have a problem, the 5 statements and ensure. I think one brief statement, but just making sure we keep all the parts. And that's really all I wanted to see. So I'm in agreement with that.
Okay, so for the red line version, basically we'd have policy purpose 1 would say the purpose of this policy is to ensure that all FCPS students have access to the appropriate educational rigor necessary while receiving the appropriate academic, social, economic resources so that personal and social identifiers are not barriers or obstacles to achieving educational excellence.
We can make that change.
So that's the policy purpose now, is what we're agreeing upon.
Yes.
Correct? I'm actually in agreement with that. So.
And the first paragraph that I wrote under policy purpose, we would wordsmith that and work it into policy statement.
And I was trying to see, is it any different than C1, the current C1?
I don't want to be picky, but when we say ensure, I still have kind of that question of how are we measuring that? Like we're making a statement here that indicates that it's an action on our part. And what is it exactly that, is being done ensuring that all of this is met. So and that's where my question comes in with measurements and to determine outcomes. I don't know that it belongs in the policy, but I do think it's something behind the scenes that we as a committee must address.
It sounds like we have consensus on Section A. Ms. Allen, when staff comes back with the proposed language, we'll see if we can come up with a way to say it without the ensure, but still conveying the same meaning. I would suggest we skip B, because as we've done in the past, definitions will be driven by the content. And let's move right into C.
So I agree with Ms. Yoho in that that's kind of a paragraph that I kind of moved up, but we can retain that paragraph that I moved up, which is the board is committed to the success, achievement of each and every student, which means providing students with equitable access to high-quality cultural relevant instruction, curriculum, academic support, and extracurricular activities in environments that are equitable, safe, diverse, and inclusive.
That would be the only statement that we would have there, correct? That would be the.
No, I would still have this, in the policy statement, I would have the second line as well. I mean, I'm arguing for my own, so
So I agree with that.
I would continue with to meet then in 2, so that would be 1. 2 would be more or less what's written in there. I think I wrote to meet the board's commitment set forth in Section A, which is the policy purpose. It is the board's expectation that FCPS establish and promote a culture valuing the unique characteristics and identifiers of every student, including their cognitive, social, emotional, and physical abilities, age, ethnicity, family structure, gender, gender expression, gender identity, language, nationality, national origin, race, religion, sexual orientation, and socioeconomic status.
So for that language there, of course, I had made some revisions, but I made those revisions based on the fact that it is outlined in the how in the regulation. That really, is this a statement that is needed in the policy? I revised it, and I just feel that it's repetitive, number one, and number two, that it doesn't necessarily belong in the policy because the regulation addresses that. It says, how are we going to do this?
I'll keep speaking. I do look at that differently. I believe that the policy is where this belongs. I believe this is a what statement. I believe that we are saying we expect, our commitment is that each of these identifiers, and I'm not going to go reread the whole paragraph again, but I believe that is what we're telling staff, that these identifiers are important and we recognize that they're important. If they choose repetitively to reuse those in regulation, that's their choice. But I want them to address the how. That's my challenge to them.
There are times when we are drafting regulations that we will draw language directly from the policy to simplify for staff who are going to the regulation. Here's the same language, it's consistent, it's the same, you don't have to go digging out both. We do at times do that, even though it's pulling some of the how into some of the why or the what into the how.
I was going to add to that. I was a little bit confused about why that piece fits more into the how for you. Like, why do you feel like that needs to go more into a regulation? To me, both of these statements, the number one that we're going to transfer on over, and then the number two, to me, both of those are the what that you all as the Board of Education, are setting forth for your staff to then carry through in their regulations. And I feel like I just need to say, I am not a voting member, but I am a member up here. I don't vote because I'm not an elected official. So, but I do get to be an official member. I just don't vote. So,
And your input is critical because you are a representative of the Citizens Advisory Committee.
thank you. But yeah, I'm comfortable with both of these statements, and then allowing the staff to go back in the regulations committee to then decide how they're going to implement. I think creating a culture, that's definitely a what.
Well, I appreciate that. I actually felt that maybe to meet the commitment set forth in section C1, it is the board's expectation that FCPS establish and promote a culture valuing the unique characteristics and identifiers of every student, period. And then the regulation speaks to the how FCPS will be doing that.
And I definitely agree, and I would like to just leave it at that, period. However, I do think in our culture today, I don't think we were ready to do that yet.
I need you all to tell me what the consensus is.
I've seen instances, having been at a lot of these kind of things on a lot of different levels, where people worry about just what you said earlier, Celeste. Do you have a list where it's limited? They'll also say including but not limited to. That way you can keep it open. But I agree. I think we have to have what's here stays here.
Well, let's leave that alone for the red line that will be brought to us at the next time.
So existing 1 and existing 2 will remain unchanged.
Yes.
I think with the one correction to meet the commitment set forth in section A, was that correct?
Yes.
Instead of C.
Yeah, because it's not C1. It would be, we're going to say the commitment in A.
Are we keeping number 3?
I had removed 3 and added that if 3 would be not in addition, it would be the board is committed to the recruitment, hiring, support, and retention of cultural, racially, and linguistic diverse administrators, instructional and support personnel that reflects a diverse makeup of our FCPS student population. Actually, I pulled that from the policy's purpose, 5, and I moved it to the policy statement.
I mean, I agree. I think that's a more appropriate place for it to be.
On Ms. Allen's point, I kind of removed to ensure. I said the board is committed to the recruitment, hiring, support, and retention of cultural, racially, linguistic, diverse administrative, instructional, and support personnel that reflects the diverse makeup of our FCPS student population.
I think I had made some additional edits, but it was wordsmithing is really what it was. And it was using the word demographic instead of the makeup of our student population.
Yeah, we could use diverse demographic of our FCPS student population.
Yeah, I actually had removed that word diverse and just said reflects the demographic makeup of our SCPS student population, but we can quibble
Wordsmith.
over.
Okay, yeah.
And
Yeah.
then
Does that make sense, Mr. Belevis?
So the existing C3 is going to go away, and it's going to be replaced with what Mr. Rose is proposing for the new C3, changing diverse makeup to demographic makeup. I also, when staff presents this back at the next presentation of this policy, we're also I'm going to ask our team to take a look at this language from the blueprint lens and make sure the language is in alignment with what the state's expectations are under the blueprint for this kind of work. So it may not come back exactly the way you have it, but if we change it, it's going to be, we'll explain how the connection to the blueprint has caused us to make that recommendation.
So now let's quickly go over to the implementation part. And if I could, and I'm not going to read it all, you have it, but I think what I tried to write here in the implementation page is about a lot of measurement and report and receiving that information and ensuring that we're meeting the goals of this what? Because I think in one of my last, we're not using bullets, but one of my last ones, it said, to track results and ensure continuous improvement, the superintendent shall provide reports no less than annually on the objectives of this policy, specifically as they relate to the board's goals and the pillars of the blueprint for Maryland's future.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not in disagreement with that. I thought that some of that language was purposeful. I just, again, I just have this, equity lens. I mean, the terminology just is, to me, a little odd. And I understand that that's how MABE presents it. So, I mean, do we move away from that? Or, I think all of these goals can be accomplished, and focused on without the use of an equity lens. I mean, it's all objectives that we want to accomplish, period.
My opinion is when they incorporated the equity lens issue is that they were actually just trying to simplify what might be a paragraph of kind of more or less what we said in our beginning about the recognition of all of these diverse challenges and natural parts of us, that then they just pared that down and said, hey, let's look through everything through an equity lens. They were just trying to trim it down. And then we have a tendency as a society to pin on that like it's something that it's not. And that's just all I look at it, is they were just trying to say, let's look at it through the lens of all of these factors we've already talked about.
And if I can say, MABE really didn't coin that term. If you look it up, it's all over the place. Harvard,
it's everywhere.
Nonprofit Advancement, Oregon.gov. It is a commonly used term.
The definition for equity lens, and I know we said we weren't going to talk about definitions, but the definition for equity lens does come out of COMAR. That is not something that staff created. That was handed down and adopted through the adoption of the COMAR, relevant COMAR sections. And so much of what the language we have here comes out of COMAR. Now, that doesn't mean you have to use COMAR's language, but we do have to be consistent with what COMAR requires of us.
I mean, I will say, I think it's kind of it's not a phrase I use all the time, but in the definition, I think using that phrase just kind of reminds us to look at everything in that way, just to not forget that we are looking at, how does this meet all the needs of all of our students? And it's easy to forget sometimes, when you're thinking about one particular thing and when you see that phrase equity lens, like, wait a minute, okay, wait, let me think about socioeconomics. Let me think of, all those things that maybe don't come up in your brain all the time. So I think I would like to keep it in.
And again, I will stand alone, but you guys have consensus, we move forward. I'm not gonna, we have time in the
So-
next revision.
So just going through paragraph by paragraph of the existing D, are we keeping the MABE questions, or are we abandoning the MABE questions and strike that whole paragraph?
I think we have consensus to strike that.
And then with respect to paragraph 2, are we, I mean, there's different versions of the wordsmithing, and again, we'll have to bump whatever the ultimate recommendation from the policy committee is against Comar. Staff will do that before the next presentation. Are we leaving 2 the way it is, or are we adopting some or all of the language that Ms. Allen or Mr. Rose has proposed?
I would be in agreement with going with Mr. Rose's edits, and then we can hash it out later. Yeah, work from there.
Okay, so let's just make that D, and then, of course, 1 would be in pursuit of the goals, and then each of those would small a, B, C, D, so forth and so on.
And then we've already talked about 3, and 4 is unchanged. 3 years, we'll bring this back again. So that gets us through policy 444.
So let's move on to 1.05, policy 443, creating welcoming and affirming schools for transgender and gender nonconforming students.
So the linear part of me wants to say, can we start at the beginning and go through the edits that we discussed? But because we know this is going to have to come back anyway for another presentation, my recommendation is we skip that, we go to the sections that we haven't had discussion on, and you can identify those because that's where it starts with no proposed language at this time by staff. If we start there, we should be able to complete 443 today, hopefully, and then the next viewing of it will be just the recommended changes. So I think for those following at home, where we left off was 443.6, access to gender segregated facilities. We had some conversation, but we did not come to any consensus on how to treat the language. Page 13 of 24.
To go right into it, my proposal is no changes to that section based on current case law.
I agree with that. As I mentioned before, I did read policies and statements from other LEAs that are similar in size and scope to ours, as well as the Maryland State Board of Education. And I agree. I think it just goes along with what the law says. So I have no changes.
And just for the record, I'll share the case law that I'm basing that on. That's Grimm v. Gloucester County School Board, and that was affirmed in both the 4th, 7th, and 11th Circuit Courts. It was appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court refused to hear the case. So
I think they preferred declined.
they declined, therefore affirming the circuit's decision. So I propose no changes to that section based on case law.
So the changes that you proposed, you're saying you're dismissing, correct?
Correct.
And to keep that language the same, okay. I'm not in consensus there, but, and I've provided the language that I feel is, I would like to see in the policy. But again, I dissent, and
So again, it sounds like we're leaving 443.6 untouched.
I think it's more because it's going to come back as a red line version, and we're going to have this discussion if we want to parse out the language. But for the purposes of returning to us for the next one, yes, I would leave it as is.
Well, so when this gets represented by staff, it's going to be in there as existing language with no proposed changes because the panel is not asking for anything. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page and understand that when this comes back around and you're not looking at me saying, well, where's all the red line that we were expecting to see? There's not going to be any because you're not asking us to make any edits to that section.
The thing about my edits, I just don't see where my edits were substantially different than what's already said there. That's the only reason why I put you through the work. Looking at my edits, I just kind of broke it down in an A, 1, 2, 3, but I think it says what was already being said. I guess I was trying to follow, again, I'm too inconsistent. Here I was trying to go and follow what we've kind of set up with the 1, 2, 3, that type of thing. So I would be open to redlining it and applying what I've written, but I think it says exactly what's already been said.
I think I would, at the very beginning, where it says students, including non-binary students, I would just start that sentence with all students. It just seems awkward to me to start it with, say all students. So maybe I'll get one red line in there.
I disagree. I have language down here which I felt like gave accommodations to those who this policy was formed for, and to maintain the protections while also protecting without infringing upon the rights of other students. So I feel that there's, in the middle school area and even in the high school area, privacy is critical for these students. And I'm talking about all students. I'm not talking just about those who identify as male or female or are non-binary or are transgender. Whatever their situation is, privacy is critical. And I think the privacy issue is one in which lends to the least amount of stress and complication of other students being harassed and bullied.
So the bathroom issue, a friend of mine, retired teacher that I went to Japan with, her son and daughter-in-law teach over on the Eastern Shore at high school. And she asked, how are the bathroom issues going at your school? The private bathroom is the most used bathroom because everybody likes privacy, for sure. I've said before, Dr. Lebo knows as well, I hate the group bathrooms because vaping, fighting, whatever is going on in there. Those are the concerns we do hear about, even from the police. But in one comment made this morning, we were able to do the security vestibules because we got grants from the Safe Schools Foundation. So if anybody wants to give us grants to redo the bathrooms, I'd be up on taking those. But so I understand where you're coming from with this, but given the reality of the situation, our policy has to reflect what we have to deal with in our schools. So I would agree for now just to leave it. This will be one that we come back and really look at again later.
I guess then I'll go backwards here. What I will propose is that we include my edit, and then we would edit it somewhat based on Celeste's recommendation, is that all students, including transgender and non-binary, should have access to facilities, restrooms, locker rooms that are consistent with their gender identity, gender expression, and a sincerely held part of the student's core identity. I guess I'm make a little bit of edit to that, but then proposing that we use my edits of 3, access to gender segregated facilities, then A, that statement, and then 1 would be, I mean, as I proposed it, any student regardless of gender who is uncomfortable. I feel like that suffices to at least give some consideration to the conspiracy theory that boys walk into girls' bathrooms or vice versa. Our administrators obviously deal with this on a daily basis, and they've done an outstanding job. And so I just want to clarify that for the public, and then it can be further clarified in regulation. But while still following the law. And it's clear that that law, as we know it, is not going to change, because the Supreme Court declined to hear that case. That case is case law. So,
Well, we know the Supreme Court will go back and review new cases, and can't say it won't change, because we know that they'll go back and undo what they feel like they should have done differently. Nevertheless, so in your proposed A, Mr. Rose, you have struck through the word including. I want to make sure that you want to keep that word as struck through. The way it reads as you proposed it, it's students, both transgender and non-binary, should have access to facilities,
well, it'd
et
be
cetera.
all students, including
So then the
transgender and non-binary.
So then the including should remain.
That's right.
And then with respect to B, are we adopting your strike through of these options, the last 2 sentences?
Well, what I'm then proposing is that we use my proposed edits of 1, 2, and 3. Do you see that copy of the edits that I provided?
It's 1, 2, and 3 in your version. It's A, B, and C here, because that will align it with the numbering when it gets into a final form. With respect to the D, or what's D in the version that was worked through by staff, it's C in your version. All I'm going to say is, and I don't see Dr. Lebo here, and we typically would not call upon, for this conversation, I wouldn't have called upon someone in staff to weigh in. What this is suggesting, though, would require retrofitting schools that may not be able to retrofit schools.
What you're talking about the last line?
FCPS will ensure that all FCPS restrooms and locker rooms offer access to single-use stalls. That may or may not be possible depending on, and I'm not an expert of our buildings, that's why I was hoping Dr. Lebo might be able to
that was
weigh in.
actually, when we got to that point, that was going to be a question, because my limited experience, I've never been in an FCPS bathroom that didn't have a stall of one kind or the other.
I've not been in all of
So
our
I
buildings.
only added that as reassurance. I've just haven't been in a lot of bathrooms in FCPS, but the ones I have been in always had at least one single-use privacy stall.
So when we bring this back for the next viewing of it, I will make sure that Dr. Lebo and his team have considered the implications of that sentence.
Yes.
Well, it seems, okay, so with restrooms, yeah, I believe there are stalls in all of them, right? At least one. I mean, I've never been into the men's, but the women's, I mean, and my sons tell me that there are stalls in there. And we're in one of the oldest schools. So the locker rooms, I don't know about that. So I think that might be where, privacy might be a little hard to come by, but there are also bathrooms in the locker rooms as well.
I can say I've probably been in every high school locker room, and the male side, all have stalls. But we'll allow Dr. Lebo to share whether that would provide any, present any issues.
Let's see. Mr. Kendrow's here. He probably knows locker rooms.
And then for the next part, you could probably just stay up there.
I'm pretty confident that all of the locker rooms would have single-use stalls.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
With doors on them?
Yes.
All right, so then I think we have the path. It's not unanimous, but there is 2 of 3. So we have the path for 443.6, access to gender segregated facilities. Keeping us moving then into participation in sports and physical education classes, which Mr. Rose, you are suggesting we modify that title because you rephrased that section header as to participation in athletics and extracurricular activities.
That was my modification, but I think we have to include physical education classes as well. I think in that title, we have to not delete that. Therefore, it would say the board recognizes that athletics, extracurricular activities, and physical education classes are an extension of school curriculum and a valuable part of educational experience for all students.
Well, I don't find boys competing with girls equitable, if we're going to use the term equity or equitable. I think that if we're looking at a fair and broad policy, and I do agree that the appeal process is cumbersome, but I just, my position would be I would disallow it. I would disallow boys from participating on girls and girls participating on boys. And if, I mean, the only exception would be for girls to participate on boys if there was parental consent and a recognition of the physical liability. But I do feel that, you know, there are realities that we must face with boys and girls, and that their physical makeup and their strength and their abilities are much different at both the middle school and the high school ages. I am not aligned with allowing the crossover.
So I don't think this is clear cut as we all want to think it is. The Olympics haven't found it to be easy. I heard Mr. Rose recently talking about, I think it was West Virginia, where was it a rule that girls could not play on boys?
There's actually a law that was passed in West Virginia that would not allow transgender boys to participate in boys' sports. Because I want to clarify that transgender boys are boys. So let's be clear about that. Let's not go back to the 50s. Transgender boys are boys, but West Virginia passed a law that they could not. They did not designate girls. They specifically excluded it. But once that was appealed, that law was struck as unconstitutional. That's Becky Pepper Johnson versus West Virginia. So therefore, based on that current case law, transgender boys are allowed to play sports in our circuit. This was the Fourth Circuit, which includes Maryland. I will add that case specifically has been applied to the Supreme Court. And those documents are due on July the 18th, and then the court will decide whether they're going to take that case. I suspect that they will. So But that case does exist. The law passed in West Virginia was found unconstitutional, so therefore, even in West Virginia, transgender boys are participating in boys' sports. So again, I'm aligning with the law. I incorporated the appeal process. I pulled that from the MP. That appeal process already existed. That was in, and I could ask Mr. Kendrow, never heard of a case of an appeal being applied to MPSSAA. Do you know if an appeal was ever brought to them under that appeal process?
I cannot speak on other school districts, so I am not aware from the entire MPSSAA.
And I think, I'm not sure if we got it in, they sent the question to you and you answered it, but to our knowledge, officially, are there any transgender students participating in sports in Maryland or in Frederick County?
Again, I can't speak across the state. For Frederick County, we asked coordinators of athletics and athletic directors, and we are not aware of any scenarios in FCPS. Then the reporting that goes into the state dealing with the number of boys and girls participating in each sport indicates 0 students outside of their designated gender for the sport.
Thank you.
And the point I was going to continue to make with the West Virginia case is you went on to say that the only way, potentially the only way to then tell who was playing what was to have genitals examined, which is what the Olympics used to do until they went to testosterone levels, which they themselves admit is not the best way, because there are many females that have natural testosterone. And so, and I always comes to mind, pops in, no offense to any males in the audience, but how would you feel about playing Serena Williams in a game of tennis? So often what happens, and I think, my son played football for 4 years at Urbana, first year of the 4-year state champions, and he didn't play in college because he hurt. He was tired of hurting. He only played with boys. My daughters, well, my youngest daughter didn't play sports, but the middle one did, and again, she only played with girls, and she didn't play in college either. So you can get hurt by people in the same gender. I've talked to my brother a lot about this because his family's very involved in sports. And it comes down to that whole thing of abilities. You look at wrestling, they're in weight categories for a reason. My son had to lose weight in middle school to play youth football and then gain weight in high school and then gained too much weight and then lost it and now has kept it off. But anyway, it's all about being able to compete at a level. And I get the concern where, is it safe? Are you competing against people that are, the expectations at a same level that you are? And so I don't have any clear answers because I think it's complicated. But I don't think it's quite as dangerous at this point as people think. And, then you just be proactive. So I'm rambling now, but this is a very difficult one, and I think it's going to take a lot more conversation and work to get to something that we can have in policy that will make people happy, and they're not going to be happy. Right now, I think it's working.
So, Mr. Rosa, in looking at the language that you have proposed, in particular with respect to the appeal process, that is diving into the implementation of the policy, the how. My recommendation to the panel would be to stop after B, where you direct staff to create an appeal process, and let's leave it to the staff to determine what that will look like, whether it's the adoption of the MPSSAA, or whether it's creating our own process. I would recommend allowing staff to do that and not direct that in your policy.
Unless there's an agreement and consensus, I'm actually going to strike that. Here's why. is as a former NCAA athlete, I could not have been more disappointed in the NCAA's response to the whole issue. The NCAA makes billions of dollars, and they could have been a leader in determining how, when, where transgender athletes participate. So I couldn't have been more disappointed after their he gave a great testimony in front of Congress in December in which he was asked how many transgender athletes are there competing in NCAA sports, and out of 550,000 athletes, they are aware of 9. So I was really disappointed that the NCAA couldn't come up with a refined policy in which they had past policies in which they did blood testing, had a requirement that you set out a year. They already had policies in place that obviously at our level we could not afford to do that. But I had hoped that they would be a leader in this area instead of just folding. So therefore, I want to strike this, and I would challenge, we remain as we are based on current law as it stands, and it's working. And one of the reasons I feel strongly about this, and again, I coached for 13 years officially, but I've been coaching my whole life, my whole adult life. I have understanding of concerns regarding transgender athletes competing at elite levels. I understand that at least concern in competition. I understand that. But at the K through 12, and I state this here, I believe that athletics and extracurricular activities are an extension of our curriculum. So at what point do we start saying you don't take Spanish because you're not Spanish, or you don't take French because you're not French? I mean, it's curriculum. Our tax dollars go toward sports, and sports is part of the curriculum. Kids learn more, not more, I won't say more. They learn as much from activities and extracurricular activities and sports as they do in the classroom. They learn discipline and structure, and they learn so much. And to just exclusively exclude a group of individuals based on ever-changing science and data, and the fact that it's the smallest of small, I'm not comfortable with just arbitrarily. That's why I supported when the Biden administration proposed the changes to Title IX, they didn't go all out. They still said, we understand that there are concerns and challenges around, and that's kind of where I parsed some of this. But what they said is you're not going to take an entire group of individuals and just say, you can't participate. That's what they said. They recognized that there are situations where there might be differentiation. And they wanted to eliminate, and the gentleman from the NCAA did a great job during his testimony. How many transgender athletes have received an NCAA scholarship? 0. They were ineligible. They had always been ineligible to receive a scholarship. So that whole point about we're taking scholarships away from kids was a false flag. It wasn't true. No scholarships have ever been given to a transgender athlete. How many transgender athletes have won national championships? 1. And we overblew that and didn't talk about the fact that in her case, she also finished 5th in another event and 8th in another. I mean, so we make mountains out of molehills in order to fit all of us, our unfortunate political persuasions. We need to address this, but I feel strongly at K through 12, it's too important a part of the educational experience. At some point, MPSSAA and our state MSDE needs to step in and determine appeal processes and the protection and safety and competitiveness of our sports, but that's a role for that body to do that statewide. I don't think we should have parsing, just like I don't think we should have states doing this and that, and I don't think we should have school districts doing this and that. I think it's a slippery slope. I mean, West Virginia, the reason, this is kind of sick. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. The reason West Virginia added in the genital checks to their law was because they recognized that West Virginia had actually passed a law allowing birth certificate changes. So they were progressive in that way. They allow you to change your birth certificate. So they recognized, oh, we can't use birth certificate to verify your sex. We've got to check your genitals. Well, that's going to be a deal breaker. I can't imagine any parent would ever have that. And it just a slippery slope of, you know, I mean, we can talk about Leah Thomas and her accomplishments, but we can also talk about, I thought this was interesting, I just read a great article on Katie Ledecky. Katie Ledecky, at the age of 28, shattered her world record last month that she set when she was 18. Amazing. Do you know how many accusations of transgenderism she's faced over her career? Dozens. Because she's the best. And no one's approached it. And to give an example of, people have tried to compare Leah Thomas with Katie Ledecky. They're not in the same breath. So let's make sure we're more considerate. That's all I ask. Let's be more considerate, and particularly when we're talking about curriculum and K through 12 sports. So there.
So, Mr. Rose, if I understand what you're saying, and I don't know that we have consensus, but I'm repeating it so we can get to a point of consensus, you're now suggesting we leave 443.7 as is, no edits.
What I would add is I want to add the same situation that I added in bathroom use, just to share that this is something our staff is already doing, that they are allowed to participate in athletics and extra consistent with their gender identity, gender expression, and a sincerely held part of the student's core identity. I just want to continue to beat down the thought that boys are walking out onto the playing field with girls or vice versa.
But if we keep the language in there that is allowing that to happen, so what we're saying is that we are approving, per this policy, for boys to play with girls and girls to play with boys on those teams.
I'm approving transgender girls to participate in girls' sports.
I would point out that we do have some co-ed teams, so we do have boys playing with girls or girls playing with boys already.
Mr. Blevis, how does this align with Title IX?
So I don't know that the Title IX itself, I know that the executive orders have tried to address gender identity in Title IX. I don't know that Title IX itself speaks specifically to interscholastic athletic participation and gender identity. In terms of the school, the Title IX implication relates really to, are we providing fair opportunity to participate, meaning we can't have 10 boy sports and 1 girl sport, right? Like, that would clearly be a Title IX violation. But that's not the situation that we're in. So I know the rollback of the CFR where the Title IX regulations rolls it back, but I've not looked at it from the lens of interscholastic athletics, so I'm not sure I'm positioned to answer that more clearly than what I've said.
Can we look at that, though? Have your staff look at that to understand that the language that we're providing in this policy does not violate federal law?
And I don't want to put Mr. Kendra on the spot, so if you can feel free to pass, but do you have any thoughts on that?
In FCPS, we pride ourselves on Title IX on equal access to facilities, to coaches, to services, to publicity, to number of coaches, to number of teams. That's where our main focus for Title IX is.
was going to provide some support because Title IX is managed by one of my offices, which is Human Resources. The Title IX law, as it currently stands, what Mr. Blivis is reporting to, is rolling back the inclusion of transgender students as being protected under Title IX. So it really doesn't speak to the participation of transgender students in athletics. So when the Biden administration made their changes in 2024 that have now been rolled back, they broadened the definition of who Title IX applied to include transgender students. That has since been removed, and it's been reverted back to the 2020 Title IX guidance. So transgender students don't file claims or not covered under Title IX as a sex-based discrimination. It's now back to sexual, but they can still file claims of concerns with bullying, harassment, intimidation through non-Title IX processes. But it doesn't speak to the inclusion of anyone in athletics.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's the additional challenge when you're looking at the changes that resulted from the rollback in Title IX. In Maryland, we have a specific law against discrimination, and it specifically references based on gender identity, which is a conflict with the Title IX CFR because now you have two very different governing standards, right? And the challenge that, and this is not a challenge unique to Frederick County, this is a challenge that everyone in Maryland is having to navigate. How do you balance what Title IX requires of us with what the state of Maryland has adopted as their statement of policy, which is what legislation is? It's a statement of policy. How do we balance that? It's not easy. So, returning to the language, because I want to keep us moving, I would like to get this done so we can come back with a proposed, an actual draft. We are going to keep 443.7 as is with the addition of that language relating to sincerely held part of student core identity from what you proposed, Mr. Rose. And that will be what we're recommending to for this section.
For the red line version, yes.
So the next section is a new section. I've titled it a new section because it didn't exist in implementation previously. It was in there elsewhere, I believe. And Ms. Rose, I think you incorporate the bullying, harassment, and intimidation. Do you want to speak to this section? It really came out, I think, from the, yes, we're talking about page 17 of 24, but it came out of what was originally in the policy purpose section, section A, the very, very beginning. We struck the entire paragraph there out of bullying, harassment, and intimidation, and I think this is Mr. Rose's effort to relocate it into implementation.
Correct. Just specifically outlined.
So is there consensus regarding the adoption of this language into as what would be a new section in the implementation?
I would say that probably the first statement should cover it. We do not need the other B and C, and just the reason for that is that, we have a whole policy that, outlines that. Reference to the policy is not bad, but we also reference that in the resources, correct? That would be referenced in the resources. And this is the policy that really does address student behavior.
I would be open to just the first line referencing board policy 437, but also maybe adding the student code of conduct.
Okay.
I get wordy sometimes, can't you tell?
That's okay. Me too. So that brings us to the overnight field trip section, existing 443.8. I will say here that staff does not have a recommendation in terms of the language, except to suggest that perhaps whatever language is finally agreed upon is relocated into policy 414, which is the field trip policy, so that all of the field trip language lives in the same place. I'm not going to suggest we reopen 414 for discussion, just that that the board give the ultimate direction that whatever this language ends up being, it no longer lives in 443, it just gets dropped into the appropriate section of 414.
And I agree with that.
Well, I would propose my edits, but I don't think I'll have consensus on that.
In recognition of time, let's just move forward with that unedited as of now.
Except to replace the bullets.
Correct. I think we'll be able to get through our next discussion because we're going to have right in front of us a red line, and we'll be able to address each section by section. So let's just move that forward as is.
So the next section is under, it's titled Other Activities. It is really a dress code section. Ms. Allen is recommending striking it. Mr. Rose did not recommend any language. Staff doesn't have any recommendation either, except to say we have a dress code policy that has been through the board. It's been recently revised. I think it makes a lot of sense to adopt Ms. Allen's recommendation.
I agree with the same thing we're doing here with the field trips. We're moving field trips into the policy. Same thing. It's addressed in our dress code policy.
And being aware of time, it hit me at graduations that it was earth-shattering when we went from girls wearing one color and boys wearing another to now they all wear the same color. That was earth-shattering, and I was on the board when we did that, so I think, or it was right before. And now we just have them all in one color, and it looks great.
So that brings us to the last section of 443, which is the training and professional development. Mr. Rose, I did not receive any recommended edits from you, so I don't know if you had intended any. Ms. Allen's edits really are just to change it from a requirement to will be given an opportunity. And Ms. Allen, you suggested striking this policy from it. I actually, in thinking back after the last meeting when we talked about that, you would be your suggestion is to take out that there will be training on the policy 443. I just want to make sure that's what your intention was.
Well, I don't know if that exactly was my intention. I felt like in order to protect those teachers and instructors and staff who have religious beliefs that this policy basically goes against, that they would have the opportunity to opt out. So instead of making it required, that they would have an opportunity to either participate or not participate.
I just need guidance from the panel.
I just think as an employer-employee relationship, I think it's well within our rights to require you to go through training. I don't see where going through training, I mean, I'd have to refer to some case law or some kind, but I don't see where going through training for your job violates your First Amendment or your religious rights.
And when we come back to this again, I've got a whole lot to say on the compelled speech, but I totally agree with, I don't think we don't make any of the other training optional. So, no, I would not agree to that.
How will we recognize those staff who, how do we handle that when staff have a conflict with their religious beliefs based on the content of the training that's being provided?
So suicide is against a lot of religions, but we have the staff do training to recognize that. I think just what Mr. Rose said, which Dean said, the training, I don't see how the training goes against your religious beliefs.
They might claim religious belief to not adhere to something they're provided in the training, but I can't see where they could make a claim of not going through the training. I just don't see where I think it should be required, like every other numerous training programs we have. I think that's a slippery slope. If we start opening it up, well, that might violate my First Amendment, because it's training. And when, as an employee, I have to take a lot of training that maybe I don't always agree with, but that's what I signed on for. So I would maintain this as training required. We addressed some of the other things, and we talked about compelled speech and things like that. We'll be talking about that later. But as far as training goes, I think it should be required. They should be trained on every policy that we have, so, yeah.
So then that brings us to our last item, which is the fiscal year 26 roadmap. This is a anticipated roadmap for everyone out there watching, coming back. I want to make it clear this is not set in stone. This can change as the needs change, as time it takes to review policies on an individual basis may take longer than anticipated. 3 panel members or 3 board members can come to me tomorrow and say, as a group, we would like you to add this policy because the 3 of us want this to be discussed. So this is not set in stone, but what I have tried to lay out is a path that gets us to complete the 400 series and to address all of the 500 series over the course of the next year. And that's what we're up to. We're up to the 500 series is the next group. There are 3 policies on here. Graduation, responsible use of social media, and anti-racism. They are on here because they either require annual review, graduation, anti-racism, or they require review every other year, which we have not done, responsible use of social media. So trying to shoehorn those in so we can meet those requirements to make sure that we are conducting the review. I have color-coded it so you can try and see if it shows up for information discussion the first time. Quickly, here's where it is again, because you just look for the same color, you'll see it again. So, graduation's in green. You can look at just for the green ones to find the second green one, second graduation. I'm actually going to talk to staff about whether we need graduation to come on twice or whether it can go on just for information, discussion, action, because that might save us a little bit of time. The question I have for the panel is, do you want me to swap August and September? In other words, do you want, right now, the way the schedule is laid out, we're going to talk about some other things in August, and we're going to come back to 443 and 444 in September. Would you prefer that we continue the conversation and I swap September and August with maybe graduation coming out and only being heard in January, or graduation staying in September and organization of the board staying in August? We can modify this. I just need to know what you guys would like us to do.
Mr. Rose, I think when we met last time that we were looking at September as that time frame for when it came back. Is that correct?
Yes.
I think that's what was stated.
And I kind of, based on public comment from our last policy meeting and public comment that we received today and emails that we've received, I'd actually like a little more time to think about what we've done today, what we've talked about today, and I think September works. That I'm okay with the current setup.
I am too.
Thank you.
And I think that one of the things that might need to be said, but maybe not, is that the current policy that's in place is still enforced, is still there. It is until the board actually approves any revisions or any changes to the policy, the existing policy is in place.
That is correct.
Correct. Anything else? Look at us with 1 minute to spare. We're adjourned.